Good morning. Good morning to those in Europe, and good afternoon to those of you joining us from Asia. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this online discussion on the Middle Corridor. What are the economic opportunities and challenges? My name is Hans-Peter Lankes, and I am the Deputy Chief Executive and Managing Director at ODI. And I would like to say a special thank you to the co-organizers of today's event, the Asian Development Bank Institute, ADBI, for their efforts in putting this event together with us. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that today's discussion is being streamed in both English and Russian using simultaneous translation. You will see an icon on the panel at the bottom that says interpretation. You can click this icon to choose your preferred language. A message should now appear in the chat function confirming these instructions in both Russian and English. So today's discussion comes at an important time. The Middle Corridor, also known as the Trans-Caspian International Transport Route, is a multilateral institutional development linking the containerized rail freight transport networks of China and the European Union through Central Asia, the Caucasus, Turkey, and Eastern Europe. The Middle Corridor is the shortest route from China's Pacific coast to Europe, and its significance has been rising in the last few years. The appeal of this Middle Corridor is growing, but a variety of operational obstacles will have to be removed in order to realize its potential and the long-term benefits for participating nations. So it is crucial, and that's what our meeting will focus on today, to analyze the economic costs and opportunities associated with overcoming the infrastructure challenges along the route. So there is a lot of potential, but the economics matter, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. In case you are not already familiar with us, ODI is a leading global affairs think tank. Today's event is hosted by our Global Risks and Resilience Program, which promotes risk-informed development and works with policymakers and businesses across different sectors and countries, supporting them to understand risks, acknowledge trade-offs, and build resilience in a rapidly changing world. So thanks for bearing with me for that little bit of product placement here. And now I'm delighted that we have such an excellent group of speakers here with us today to discuss these pressing issues. Unfortunately, Dean Tetsushi Sonobe, the CEO of ADBI, who was going to provide opening remarks, had to pull out at the last minute due to illness. And the same is true for Guljan Argenbayeva, who was also going to be with us from Kazakhstan, and she had to pull out. So we end up having a bit more time on the panel, time for questions and answers. But it is unfortunate that they are not going to be with us and sharing their expertise. Now, let's go to two presentations first to start our session. And for that, let me introduce Idil Bilgic Alparslan, who is an Associate Director in the Strategy and Delivery Department at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD. Idil is an economist with 15 years of experience in macroeconomic policy, development economics, and private sector development. And she recently led a study on sustainable transport connections between Europe and Central Asia, which was published in June 2023, so very timely. Idil will present the findings of the study in her presentation. Now, Idil, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Hans. So I'm very delighted to be here today and have the opportunity to present the results to the audience. Let me quickly share my screen, and then we'll be able to start, hopefully. So if you can just let me know if you see the screen. So
yes.
Thank you. So as Hans said, the EBRD has led a study which was funded by the European Union throughout 2021 and 2022 in order to identify the most sustainable transport connections between Europe and Central Asia. Of course, the landscape has changed a lot between when we started the project and when we ended it. So the significance of the Middle Corridor or the Trans-Caspian Transport Network has increased significantly. over the last 2 years, let's put it that way. So our study is indeed quite timely, and it's been very well received by the private sector, by the public authorities across Central Asia, but also in Caucasus and Europe as well. So as guided by ODI, I'd like to focus the 4 main discussion topics here today. One of them is, of course, the opportunities that are presented by the Middle Corridor and what happens if we develop it further. The second one is the challenges. What are the barriers against the development or materialization of all these opportunities? The third one is the economic costs of infrastructure development. What are the actual costs that we are looking at? And then, of course, the last question relates to how can it be financed, all these costs, if you want to see a major development along the Middle Corridor. So our study has focused on Central Asia and what to do in Central Asia in order to support the development of the Middle Corridor or the Trans-Caspian Transport Network. So we haven't looked at or assessed Caucasus or Turkey as much in detail, but still, of course, we had a very good idea about the operating environment, because ultimately, if you develop a corridor, you have to look at the whole section in order to assess whether it will be functional or whether it will have good impact on the users. Having said that, I'm 100% sure everybody here in the audience has seen multiple maps of Middle Corridor. You see it goes through Kazakhstan and then all the way to Caucasus and Turkey or Black Sea. But if you look in detail into the Middle Corridor, there are 3 alternatives that can be assessed and that can be prioritized in terms of development. The first one is the northern alternative, which goes through northern Kazakhstan. And it starts from the Dostik border crossing point with China and then goes towards Aktau from the northern part of the country. The second alternative is the central network, central Trans-Caspian network, which goes through southern Kazakhstan and then again combines with northern Kazakh route around Shalkar-Bayneo and then continues to Aktau port on the Caspian Sea. And this one starts at Borgos, which is the most recent border crossing point and the most functional border crossing point with China. And then the third alternative that we are looking at within the Middle Corridor is the southern alternative, which is through Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and via Turkmenbashi port. It connects to the Baku port in Azerbaijan again. So when we are talking about Middle Corridor, of course, there are different alternatives, different variations. But if the countries need to focus their investments on sustainable connections, then they'll need to prioritize their investments along a route rather than ad hoc and spatial different investments. So as part of our assessment, we identified and compared all these 3 routes against each other. I'll come to this point again in a second. But regardless the route itself, of course, we know the Middle Corridor has multiple advantages vis-a-vis the alternative corridors, because it has a very strategic location, and actually it is politically and from a safety perspective more feasible these days. It provides direct access to Asia via the border crossing points. It provides direct access to economic centers in Central Asia as well. The existing network itself allows to access the economic centers in the region. Hence, it is possible to build upon the existing network as well. And of course, finally, it is a stable and sustainable alternative compared to the other routes. We believe if there'll be coordinated and joint action along the Middle Corridor, then the development of the Middle Corridor would offer benefits for everyone in the region. Not only one country, 2 countries, but everyone in the region. First of all, the stronger regional coordination between the 5 Central Asian countries, as well as the other corridor countries, would allow the establishment of a single corridor manager, which can provide services along the route in a more efficient manner. Of course, this needs to be accompanied by unified tariffs and procedures so that the users will be able to deal with a single operator or single stakeholder so that they'll have more predictability. The second benefit that we can expect from the development of the Middle Corridor is increased connectivity between the economic centers, which will actually have an impact on the lives of the people living in Central Asia. because ultimately the development of the middle corridor, the routes, the network itself, accompanied by the development of economic structures, would allow for higher regional and international value chain integration, which is extremely important for Central Asia, especially considering the current export structure of the region. And of course, it's going to provide more enhanced economic opportunities for the people in terms of employment and social access. The third benefit that we can foresee or envisage is the improved border crossing practices should the middle corridor develop with a regional perspective. It will lower the transaction costs and times that will benefit the people of the region, but also the users along the middle corridor, hence supporting prices or avoiding price increases who are using this, avoiding price increases for the users who are using this section, because we know that the logistics costs can be as high as 15% of the final sale price of a good. So if you think about the length of the middle corridor and how much efficiency gains we can achieve should the corridor develops further, then you can understand the impact of potential impact of lowering the transaction costs and times. And of course, user-friendly procedures would allow the users to shift their preferences towards this corridor that would ultimately increase the volumes and support investments further. Again, if regional coordinated action materializes between the countries and the stakeholders, then that would also allow for enhanced long-term planning, which is very much needed, considering the limited fiscal space and extremely high investment needs in the region from the infrastructure perspective. So this would support improved project prioritization, but at the same time, coordinated implementation on different sides of every border on the map. And finally, of course, given the length of the middle corridor and the intentions to shift towards rail, it will support better environmental outcomes. It would support not only mitigation, but also climate change adaptation if resilient transport infrastructure can be built in the region. So we ultimately don't see this as a transport network development project, the middle corridor itself. But from the policy perspective, from the investor perspective, what we would like better to see is a regional development perspective for everyone that would benefit the region itself foremost, but then the users as well, both in Asia and in Europe. However, we are very much aware that currently there are many challenges that are limiting the realization of the desired outcomes. And these outcomes have been collected via user surveys throughout our study. And of course, as you all know, the key expected outcomes or desired outcomes are much better service quality, enhanced capacity, much better, much better competition and options through the involvement of private sector, and further network reach. But then at the same time, of course, the users would like to see enhanced interoperability between different network sections along the corridor. However, of course, these desired outcomes have been hampered by the challenges, and I'm not going to go into the details because I know other speakers will talk and we'll talk about these things, but we know that the tariffs are an issue, lack of a unified tariff. Regulatory harmonization is still not in place, so that creates uncertainty for the users. There are capacity limitations in different nodes of the network. One node allows for much higher capacity, but then ultimately the corridor performs as much as its lowest or weakest link, right? So we have to think about it as a corridor rather than ad hoc investments. And of course, private sector participation has been limited, not so much in Kazakhstan, but and also relatively better in Uzbekistan, but other sections of the Central Asian network has been almost closed for private sector participation, and that's a problem. And finally, of course, the users would like to see the single corridor management approach in order to be able to deal with a single party, single authority that would enhance the predictability of their relationship management. So as part of our assessment, as I mentioned initially, we assessed 3 Central Asian corridors against each other. And we managed to identify actually the central network is the most sustainable one, because as you can see on the map, it already has a very existing, large, extensive transport network. It has catchment area that involves 4 of the most populous 5 cities in Central Asia, except for Astana. It involves pretty much most of the border crossing points that are conducive for further development. And also there are multiple economic production centers within the catchment area of this central network. So the gray area you see, the dark gray area you see here is the 300-kilometer catchment area from the main Kazakh network, and then the light gray one is the 600 catchment area on towards north and south of this South Kazakhstan area. So if we think about the middle corridor or like the Central Trans-Caspian network as a infrastructure asset development program with a regional approach, then we can't only develop a single line, but if we manage to also improve the cross-border links and manage to connect other Central Asian connections, integrate all of them together, then we'll be able to see very good economic outcomes for the whole region, including these economic centers actually. But of course, we know that in Central Asia only, additional investments of 18.5 billion euros is needed to materialize the 33 or 32 priority investment needs that have been identified. We looked at more than 170 investment projects that are potentially possible in the region, and we prioritize them as per sustainability criteria again. And in order to materialize these priority investment plans or investment projects, 18.5 billion euros is needed. But at the same time, it's not only hard infrastructure, as I mentioned. We need to see improvements on the soft connectivity side as well, both in the short term, but also in the medium term. And these are the usual suspects. Again, I do believe during the Q&A session, we can go into the details of this, but of course they include digitalization, interoperability, enhanced PPP markets for enhanced private sector participation, trade facilitation, all sorts of these things. And there are very detailed assessments in the report. If anyone is interested, they can go check the report on both EU and EBRD web pages. But good thing is actually, if these improvements are materialized somewhat or realized, then we'll see very significant returns for the region. So this slide here, the left-hand side graph shows the business as usual scenario where we estimate the container traffic on the Central Trans-Caspian network. So I know that in 2022, you must have seen that the middle corridor has carried 33,000 containers. You must have seen the news. But actually the 33 means some of them have gone through the southern Kazakh route, and the others went through the northern Kazakh route. So this 18,000 here, based on our assessments and interviews with the users, is the one that traveled through southern Kazakhstan route, which is the backbone of this Central Trans-Caspian network. And if everything goes fine under the business as usual scenario, we expect that this Central Trans-Caspian network would be able to carry 130,000 containers by 2040. This is the business as usual scenario. However, if all the improvements materialized, including the soft connectivity measures, then we would be able to see 865,000 containers on the Central Trans-Caspian route. So this is a 7-fold increase compared to the business as usual scenario. So it shows the sheer size of the potential impact that we are talking. And of course, the benefits would be mostly to the Central Asian countries because they will be benefiting from the revenues that all these trains will be developing, the trucks will be traveling within the region so that they'll be receiving fees and tariffs through access charges. But then at the same time, not only the Central Trans-Caspian route, but also, of course, the Northern Trans-Caspian route and the Southern Trans-Caspian route would also benefit from this increased opportunities. So ultimately, for middle corridor, we are looking at 1.4 million containers by 2040, if all these improvements materialize, which is almost equal to the Northern corridor's traffic in 2021, 2022. But of course, now we have to come back to the financing because we are talking about a huge amount of investment needs here. So who's going to finance? currently the scope of bankable investment projects in the region is quite narrow, as we all know. That's why the IFIs are heavily involved. That's why most of the projects are sovereign funded. And given the limited bankability opportunities in the region, we expect most of the projects to be financed by the governments, if any. However, even now, there are promising sectors for private sector participation, and we know that the European investors are quite interested, not only European, but also Asian investors are quite interested in investing in ports and fleet expansion and warehousing facilities, which are more about like the logistics sector. But still, they would need guidance and clarity and predictability from the government. So even if they come, they would still look at the government in terms of enhanced soft connectivity measures. But of course, if the freight traffic, the economic activity in Central Asia itself, and the transport volumes along the Eurasian network increases, then we would expect to see more private sector participation in the region. But we have to be realistic. Currently, we are looking at more sovereign financing, and governments will need to take some action if they would like to bring private sector to the region for their investments. So I'm just gonna, hopefully I didn't exceed my time too much, but that's pretty much it. And I think we can discuss more during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Oh, you're on. Okay. Ida, thanks. That was a very interesting, very comprehensive presentation. So what I take from it is that there's definitely very significant potential to increase the value of this route. There will have to be a need for coordination. There's a need for policy adjustments. There's a need for capital, but the capital could potentially have very high returns. So it's a matter of, in the end, the political will and the decisions and the coordination that would be able to unlock these returns. Okay, now with that, let's go over to the next presentation. I would like to give the floor to Roman Mogilevsky, who's a senior economist at the Asian Development Bank. Roman has extensive experience in researching trade policy, public finance, labor markets, social policy, and macroeconomics in Central Asia and Eastern Europe. And Roman's presentation will be on the development of the Middle Corridor. So please, over to you, Roman.
Thank you very much. Let me present preliminary results of our study, which we are doing at the Asian Development Bank together with my director and colleague, Dr. Liaziza Sabirova. So let me first provide this a little bit of qualification, because we use terminology somewhat different from what was in the EBRD study in the previous presentation. For us, Middle Corridor is any corridor crossing Caspian Sea. We also use language Northern Corridor, but that's the corridor which goes through Kazakhstan via Russia and then Belarus to European Union. So north of Caspian Sea. And there is theoretically also Southern Corridor which goes south of Caspian Sea. That's our language. So please, there is no contradiction. It's just different geographical understanding of terms. So we saw that recent shocks, which were many in recent years, the pandemic and the war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the crisis with maritime routes of different kinds, they all created major risks for PRC Europe freight traffic, which is one of the most important streams of global trade. But not only for that, well, the economies of Caucasus and Central Asia, they also were strongly affected by these shocks in different ways. Some suffered, some benefited unexpectedly, but well, they were strongly affected. And from the vulnerability of different routes, position Middle Corridor as the least vulnerable route for Trans-Eurasian Union, Trans-Eurasian and regional transport flow. So basically, nothing happened along this corridor in terms of political events. It still functions as should be. That attracts great interest to the Middle Corridor, and due to complications on different routes, competing routes, the demand for shipments via this corridor has dramatically increased in 2022. We are now in 2024, and we know a little bit more about what has happened. So we have now no developments during the whole 2022 and 2023. So first, we know that ocean shipments resumed in 2022, and prices for shipments, which were like very, very high, extraordinarily high, fell dramatically to normal levels. Well, they are now up again, but well, that's, we will see the fluctuations. Anyways, they are nowhere close to what we had it during the pandemic time. The northern corridor, which goes through the war-affected territories, there were major concerns whether it is going to function as it used to be. Now we know it continued functioning in 2022 and 2023. Well, the volumes shipped through this northern corridor, again, to remind you, through Kazakhstan, from China, Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, Poland, these volumes fell, but not because of politics, but because of the ocean route took over a substantial part of the traffic, which was very large in 2021, 2022. Same with middle corridor. The container traffic via middle corridor has never been anything comparable to northern corridor. It was just few percent of that. And it also fell in 2023. You can, well, that's a small font, I have to admit, but if you look at the second graph on the right, and your yellow section is container traffic at Aktau port, which is a key port in the middle corridor. You can see how small it is in 2023 compared to 2024, no, 22, sorry. So yes, it also contracted significantly. There were major worries, which again increased interest to the middle corridor regarding functioning of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, which is the main way for Kazakhstan to export its crude oil through pipeline to Russian port of Novorossiysk and then via tankers to everywhere. It still continues to function. Well, there were interruptions, worrisome, but well, so far it works. Another possible factor which affects performance of the middle corridor is the subsidies provided by PRC government to users of the railway route to Europe. Those subsidies are very significant, but government of China declared the medium-term intention to cut or fully eliminate them. They are still in place. But if they will be cut, then economics of middle corridor and also northern corridor may change dramatically, just for that reason. Also, when we talk about middle corridor, sometimes we think only movement from in western direction, from China, from Central Asia, from Caucasus to Europe. Well, actually, we have quite a flow of goods in opposite direction from Europe and from Western partners who trade, well, whose goods arrive in Georgian ports in the eastern direction. And we know that there was huge flow of re-exported goods to Russia, which are channeled through countries of Caucasus and Central Asia, and a significant portion of those re-exports go through the middle corridor. So middle corridor serves not only exports of countries of our region, but also imports. Recently, there were several studies on middle corridor, which were published or prepared by different international organizations, by EBRD, which we just heard, very interesting study, very important study, World Bank, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Asian Development Bank Institute is preparing a compendium of more organizations and researchers who contributed to the discussion. I really don't want to repeat everything that's written. There's a lot of useful insights. Some takeaway, and by the way, we are also finalizing our own study, and we are going to publish it relatively soon. Actually, as soon as possible, let me say. So what are takeaways of other people's studies? Well, it is the main point made explicitly in the World Bank's report, but it's also, other reports also hint on that. Middle Corridor is not going to be the main route serving traffic between PRC and European Union. It might be useful for that purpose, but it's never going to be very the main channel, because you have Northern Corridor, which still functions. You have ocean route. You may have some other competing routes in the future. So Middle Corridor is predominantly for own use of countries in the region of Caucasus and Central Asia. That's for them mostly, to connect them to each other and to their Western trade partners. Europe, the main, of course, but there are also, through the sea, you can go to Africa, America, elsewhere. Middle Corridor still retains strategic importance as a critical resilience mechanism. If something happens, China has alternatives. Countries of the region have very few alternatives. So for them, Middle Corridor is really something which is under their control, and that's the only, well, sufficient reason to care much about development of this corridor. As mentioned already, and World Bank documented that transportation costs and times for shipments via Middle Corridor are really high, much longer times, much more costly to ship goods in containers and non-containerized goods through the Middle Corridor so far. So it is really a challenge to bring this cost down, to make this corridor competitive. To make this happen, you need the large infrastructure investments, but also you need major improvements in trade facilitation and logistics along the Middle Corridor on different segments, actually on all segments. And as was mentioned, that everybody stresses that, and we are happy to repeat that, regional cooperation is key for Middle Corridor development, because, well, that's multi-country facility. As we position Middle Corridor as serving the trade of Caucasus and Central Asia, first and foremost, let's have a quick look on this trade. First of all, their mutual trade, the intra-regional trade, is small. You can see that the left-hand side graph, but it's just a few percentage points from the total of the total trade. But their non-energy trade is not that small, and also has pretty sustainable upwards trend. Also, this trade is good because it provides countries of the region with better international value chain participation roles than trade with other partners. So they sell to the world, for the outside world, basically raw materials, and import finished products. To each other, in the trade to each other, you have much more rich picture. They sell processed products and they import intermediary products, for example, from each other. So it's really, you have some still small number, but at least some emergent value chains inside the region. You can see the second graph, which provides some illustration for that. Then, that's a bit strong point, but let me make it. Energy trade, energy exports of countries of the region require pipelines to fully serve exports of oil from Kazakhstan, or from gas from Turkmenistan, or for Azerbaijan, same. You need pipelines. Railways or vessels on Caspian Sea may be useful for some needs, for some flows, but they don't provide no full-scale alternative. If something happens with existing pipelines, well, then the Caspian Sea, Trans-Caspian Sea is no replacement. And also, we know that Kazakhstan is now using even more pipelines going through Russia than before. Some other opportunities opened. So it leads us to the conclusion that we need to focus on non-energy trade. But it is asymmetrical in terms of transport mode. So it arrives by rail. For example, goods arrive to the region by rail and depart by road or by sea. And so you can see the short graph, which again provides a little bit of evidence of that kind. Lastly, let me make a strong point that it is a multimodal corridor, but it is not even two modes, sea and rail. We couldn't ignore road as well. because it is very important, especially for imports, but also for exports. So it's really for some countries of the region, it is more than half of trade turnover by weight, which served by road transport. Now coming to Asian Development Bank and its contribution to the Middle Corridor. Well, we have the organization, which is ADB host secretariat, CAREC, the Central Asian Regional Economic Cooperation Program, which includes all countries of the region, plus few more countries, including Pakistan, Afghanistan, Mongolia, and China, of course. So under CAREC umbrella, we have several strategies which basically address all those issues which were mentioned in the previous presentation and the current presentation. We have CAREC integrated trade agenda on trade facilitation, trade policy matters. We have CAREC transport strategy covering issues with different types of transport, and we have specifically railway strategy for CAREC. ADB tries to support development of the corridor in different ways through hard infrastructure projects. We have projects in roads in listed countries, in railways, in ports. Oh, that's not only active projects, that's also planned projects are included here. We try to support structural reforms in economies of the regions by policy-based lending, for example, in the railway sector. We have plenty of different technical assistance programs aiming at improvements in software and structure, customs, joint border crossing points, information exchange, SPS measures, etc. We have specifically developed a monitoring mechanism for corridor performance, which is called Corridor Performance Monitoring, Measurement and Monitoring. Those who are not familiar, I invite to familiarize yourselves. That's like really may serve as a tool to measure, okay, we invest, so what? Do we achieve any results? And finally, last but not the least, we believe that institutional development is and knowledge work are absolutely necessary to promote the Middle Corridor. And for that, we are now considering developing in collaborative in an inclusive manner Middle Corridor development strategy. So to summarize, Middle Corridor is strategically important, is even more than ever, to serve Caucasus and Central Asia, their trade between themselves and with Western partners. It may also have a role in serving long-haul transcontinental transit between Europe and PRC. It is a multimodal route combining railroad and sea. And in general, in our bank, which is concerned about climate change, that's not a good thing. So because we know that road, for example, and sea they are measuring emitters of carbon emitters. So we need climate smart solutions. When we improve the infrastructure, we need to prioritize that. We need to work hard to reduce costs, transport and transit costs. And we might, as already was described, should be achieved through a mix of hard infrastructure, soft infrastructure, measures and competition enhancing structural reforms. I may come to that later in the discussion, and institutional developments. And ADB is kind of really prioritizes Middle Corridor development at this stage. Thank you very much. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Roman. This was a very nice compliment to Idil's presentation. I think you set sort of the Middle Corridor in a very realistic framework here. So I take from it that we shouldn't view it primarily as a means of boosting the transcontinental trade. For that, it has a resilience benefit. But we should look at the benefits for Central Asia itself and the connectivity within the region, and the benefits that it can draw economically from this, and that's an important consideration here. So this Middle Corridor is very unlikely to turn into the main route for long-term trade, but it has value in itself and has value in particular in the region. And found it interesting how you placed CAREC as a driver of change, as a platform, and which can also help to coordinate the work of the multilateral development banks and others. So very useful background for our panel, and we're now going to turn to the panel, which would focus on various aspects around the economics of the Middle Corridor and the current issues surrounding it. And I will start with a question for each of our panelists before we move to a more free-flowing discussion. So first of all, I'm very happy to introduce Richard Pomfret, our first panelist. Richard is Senior Adjunct Professor at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Bologna, in Italy. And he's also Professor of Economics Emeritus at the University of Adelaide in Australia, and I believe he's joining us from Australia today. Richard has many years of experience advising international organizations and other bodies, and he's the author of several books, currently writing the book with the title Central Asia's Russian Era and After, Russia's Near Abroad or the Crossroads of Asia, ? And that is what we want to hear from you now, Richard. You've done all this research on the history, the development of the transport connections between Europe and Asia. Can you tell us a bit more about the historical development of these routes? Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Hans-Peter, and thank you also, Elvira, for inviting me to this very interesting panel. My worst fears have actually been met, because I was very afraid Idil and Roman would say a lot of the things that I wanted to say, and much of their presentations I agree with, so I won't repeat that. And so if I mention their presentations, I'll mention the things I disagree with, because I think that's a little bit more interesting. Okay, in terms of the history, history, I think, is very straightforward in the very long term. We all start off talking about the Silk Roads for 2 millennia. There were overland routes between China and Europe with camel caravans, and then about 1500, the Portuguese navigators discovered the sea route to Asia, and then sea dominates, and then it's a straight line from there to modern container ships with over 20,000 containers on them. Two lessons from that I think, that very simplified history is that, the Silk Road is a reminder that there have always been benefits for trade between Europe and Asia. There are reasons for trade, even when it was hazardous and long and dangerous. Merchants went along those routes. Secondly, the emergence of ocean shipping, building of the Suez Canal and so on, has really reduced the cost. When we look at the East Asian miracle of the last half century, those exports from East Asia, they all go by sea to Europe. There's no competing with these boats, 25,000 containers. And when Idil mentioned, getting the rail transport up to sort of 800,000 containers, how many boats is that? 45 boats. There's no competing on price. So how did these rail land bridges develop? Well, they developed in the 2000s, initially by the German car companies looking for ways to get components to their assembly plants in China. They were willing to pay more for faster delivery and reliable on-time delivery. We're talking about global value chains. These are the important characteristics. So they chartered trains. This is flat truck wagons that would carry containers full of components that were valuable enough to pay a premium to get them there on time. These are few and far between. The second stimulus was the decision by the Chinese government to try to encourage more activities in central China, or Western China, as they called it, to move the locus of activity away from the East Coast. They encouraged factories in Chongqing, in Sichuan province. And these factories were built by companies like HP making printers, Foxconn assembling Apple products, Intel. And they were going to ship the products for Europe up the Yangtze River. The Yangtze River becomes crowded, congested. So they look to sort of have a rail connection from central China to Europe. At the same time, the car companies want the rail connection going the other way. It starts around 2011. In 2011, there were 17 trains going between China and Europe and China. It's successful by 2015. We're looking at 1,700 trains. There is rapid growth going on. Why does it happen? My argument is that it is overwhelmingly market-driven. The state-owned rail companies have to collaborate. The governments have to collaborate in having easy clearance through customs when they cross borders. There's a little bit of investment needs to be done, but the track is already there. What happens is that as the rail services become more interesting to the customers, freight forwarders and companies like DHL, which is owned by Deutsche Bahn, or FedEx, start to offer other services, partial container services. They can provide the mixed modal services to get from the termini to where people want the goods picked up or delivered to. They have refrigerated containers. And it's this development that mushrooms. By 2016, we've got daily services between Chongqing and Duisburg. And this is associated with a huge increase in traffic along the Northern Corridor. Two things I would point out about that is that, first of all, I think it was overwhelmingly market-driven. I think that is quite important. Secondly, China was always a bit worried about being dependent on a single route. Roman referred to this, I think, a bit obliquely. As soon as UN sanctions on Iran were eased in 2016, China sent trains to Tehran. They were trying to avoid this dependence on a route for Russia. But it wasn't a good route to get to Europe because the rail connections between Iran and eastern Turkey are really in terrible shape. You've got to take a boat across Lake Van, the track's in bad shape. So attention shifts to the middle corridor, which is the theme of our talk today. The middle corridor has its benefits. It's much more direct to go to Turkey, the Middle East, or Southern Europe. It has its problem. You have to go across the Caspian Sea. So you've got to put the containers on a boat that goes across the Caspian Sea. In many of the routes, for example, on Edil's map, you then go across the Black Sea, which means you put on another boat that goes across the Black Sea. These boats aren't great. There are only 3 boats on the Caspian Sea. This is a major issue, I think. So there has to be some investment in improving the sea crossings. Final point I want to make, because I'm aware that you only gave me 5 minutes, is that when we try to look at these options, I think we should be very careful about saying this is where the future is going to be. The future is really hard to predict. I'm much happier predicting the past. What is going to happen? Well, first of all, we don't know what's going to happen to the route through Russia. It's still being used a lot, as Roman said. The German car companies still use that to send the components to China. They don't pay Russian railways. The Chinese partners pay Russian railways, so they get around sanctions that way. That is a huge advantage. It's an overland route. So that's going to come back. Also in the longer term, if relations with Iran improve sufficiently to have routes through Iran or through Afghanistan, a southern route going south of the Caspian Sea could develop. When we look at what China is doing, their major new investment program is to connect Kashgar in Western China through Roman's home country of Kyrgyz Republic to Uzbekistan. That will link to many Chinese cities and production centers more directly to the middle corridor, to a southern corridor, which is in many ways a desirable thing. When we look at Uzbekistan, which has really liberalized over the last 7 years, they're already sending their exports, fertilizers, clothing, other exports, along these routes through Turkmenistan. All the maps we've seen so far have got things going through the ports of Kazakhstan. Turkmenistan is a pain in the neck at the moment, but if they start to liberalize, that is a shorter route across the Caspian. So a big warning about saying this has to be the exact route in future. And the lesson from the land bridge so far is the private sector will help to tell you which are the routes that users want to patronize. What are the ways of doing this, of getting things between China and Europe and between Europe and China? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was great. So one thing to take from this is that the middle corridor is not the only alternative to the major transcontinental routes, and so there's this competition to take into account. And one thing that raises in my mind is whether the uncertainty of, where the future potential is really going to be realized, that uncertainty could itself be a deterrent to capital investment that we are looking for. So even though this is a market-driven development, the market isn't necessarily going to be very clear on the specific route, the specific tracks that would be winning out in the future, a bit like you have with technology uncertainty. So with that, I want to turn to our next panelist. And our next panelist is Radka Menešová, who is the head of the project department at the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport in Central Asia, where she focuses on international projects aimed at enhancing trade connectivity in Central Asia. So smack on our topic here today. My question to Radka is, what are the challenges that you see to the development of the middle corridor? And specifically, are there any challenges experienced by freight companies on this route?
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be here among such a leading experts. And yes, as Mr. Ponkert said, my expectations, basically, Mr. Rahman and Ms. Itil has already have given an overview, but more globally, more like the perspectives were on a sort of global way analysis. As per me, yes, I would like to mention, I guess, to come more about what actually forwarders experience as an institute and working with international donor projects. We have done an anonymous questionnaire among the Central Asian freight forwarders who actually used or used to use or still planning to use the middle corridor and asked their concerns. So one of the biggest challenges from their perspective was the hidden costs. However, and that there is also infrastructure, as has been mentioned a lot. And if to go more into details, we've been discussing that there is an infrastructure constraint, but specifically for Central Asian freight forwarders, it was the vessel unreliability, because the Caspian ships only move when there's enough cargoes from Aktau. That obviously leads to the cargoes being held up, and also railway capacities. We all already know that there is a limitation to that, and transloading. And because this Caspian or this multimodal, that's basically one biggest challenge for freight forwarders, because obviously it's in their interest to move faster their cargoes, but because there is a transloading and there is a difficulties, as was stated by the World Bank, administrative basically difficulties as well. And despite, for example, in a best scenario that investments are attracted and the infrastructure challenges are being met, there is still an issue with cross-boarding on a legislation level. It has to be harmonized, so for it to basically flow faster. And I guess another point I'd like to make from our point of view is environmental challenge. Basically, the Caspian Basin has to be taken into account now, where everyone is discussing about infrastructure and the future prognosis, but I guess what has to be taken into account is the deterioration of the Caspian Basin, and it has to be taken into account when discussing the future basically prospects of the middle corridor. I guess that's my add-on to the previous great discussions and the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Radka. I think it's very good that you're putting the environmental challenge on the table, and in particular in this very, very vulnerable part of the world, and that needs to be factored in also into the economics of this corridor. So it'd be interesting to hear, perhaps later in our discussion, how others react to that. Our next panelist is Dolores Chudebekova, who is Director of the World Economy Research Center at the Economic Research Institute of Kazakhstan. And Dolores, my question to you is, what opportunities do you see the Middle Corridor presenting for countries in the region in terms of trade integration? So how can the Middle Corridor be a sort of trigger for deeper integration in the region? Over to you, please.
Hello, everyone, and I'm honored to be here, and I'm welcoming all participation. And in the context of the deepening process of globalization and the aspiration of states to integrated interaction within the framework of economic association is of particular importance. And regional integration of states with similar levels of economic development, potential, and historical background can be expected to facilitate more effective integration into the world market economy. And one of the main factors of regional development is the transport and logistic complex. And in this way, the Middle Corridor holds the promise of unlocking new avenues for trade integration, economic development, and cultural exchange. With infrastructure investment, Central Asian countries gain access to port along the Middle Corridor, providing them with maritime connection to international markets. And this access opens up new avenues for export and imports, stimulating economic growth and diversification. Additionally, the improved infrastructure reduces transit times and costs, making the landlocked developing countries more competitive in the global market. Furthermore, diversifying trade routes is a strategic imperative in the modern global economy for several compelling reasons. And first and foremost, it mitigates the risk associated with geopolitical tensions and potential disruptions along specific roads. And secondly, diversification contributes to economic stability by reducing reliance on a single market or trading partner. Relying on a narrow range of trade routes limits a nation's flexibility in responding to economic shifts or changes in the demand for specific goods. By diversifying trade routes, countries are able to access a broader array of markets, fostering economic growth and stability. And for example, trade between China and the European Union in 2022 increased by 22.8% compared to 2021, amounting $856.3 billion US. And for example, another side that the trade turnover between Central Asia and the European Union countries also continues to grow, reaching $48 billion in 2022. And economic cooperation along the Middle Corridor not only contributes to regional trade integration and stability, but also provides a platform for diplomatic dialogue and conflict resolution. Moreover, joint economic ventures and projects can serve as confidence-building measures, fostering goodwill and cooperation among Middle Corridor's countries. Collaborative efforts in infrastructure development, trade agreements, and investments initiative create a common ground for diplomatic engagement. In the face of disagreements or disputes, economic cooperation provides a framework for nations to come together, negotiate, and find mutually beneficial solutions that preserve the stability and prosperity of the region. And the transformative nature of the Middle Corridor extends beyond the physical movement of goods. It represents a renaissance for Central Asia or on the world stage. Through the corridor's comprehensive approach, integration, infrastructure, regulatory frameworks, and economic cooperation, Central Asian countries have the potential to reshare their destinies and become key players in the evolving landscape of international trade. And also, the Middle Corridor stands as a testament to the power of connectivity, collaboration, and vision, offering Central Asia a pathway towards a future market by shared prosperity, sustainable growth, and renewed position of influence in the global economy. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Dolores. I think that's a very interesting way of looking at the Middle Corridor, as essentially by establishing improved external competitiveness, it also makes it possible for the internal comparative advantages in Central Asia to play out. And for that, of course, there's a need for trade harmonization, for regulatory action within Central Asia. And the question is, can the Middle Corridor, can that incentive be enough to drive the internal harmonization? Also useful to look beyond trade in goods and at other aspects of regional integration. Great. Now, turning to our next panelist, and would like to introduce Dina Ashgalieva, who's a senior research fellow at ADBI. Dina is a co-organizer of today's event and has many years of experience of working as an economist. Her current research focuses on energy policy. So my question to Dina is, you have researched the impact of the corridor on the participating countries. Can you tell us about the spillover effects of the Middle Corridor on participating economies, sort of complementing what we've heard from Dolores just now? Please go ahead, Dina.
Thank you very much, Hans-Peter. Especially you pronounce my last name so well. That was not expected. I usually don't expect such. Thank you so much. So it was great to speak after all these fantastic speakers with 2 reports from EBRD and ADB presented. So we at ADBI, we produced a book on Trans-Caspian Corridor, which is another name of the Middle Corridor, in 2021 first. And I think it was the first book on this topic. It was before the COVID, before the war, so attention to this topic was not so high. But then after the war started, the attention to the topic became so high, and I got many questions about this corridor. And also, as Roman said, several reports by big organizations were published: EBRD, ADB, OECD, World Bank, and more to come as well. So there is a great attention. Actually, I'm very happy. I'm myself from Central Asia. I'm very happy to such attention. The region faced usually facing this problem with attracting investments in transport. Why? Because the region is very, very low population density. Like probably you know, we have vast territories, huge territories. So it means you need to invest a lot in infrastructure because huge territories, vast distances, while population density is very small. So it's very hard to get enough of local demand, right? So for example, you can see my background picture. I'm right now in Tokyo. There is no problem with local demand, right? Because it's probably one of the most densely populated places on Earth. So it's a lot easier to invest in infrastructure because there is enough demand for infrastructure. So infrastructure is very well organized, convenient, and lots of transportation is available. While in Central Asia, we have very limited local demand. So how to attract investments when demand is so limited, such a low population density? Also, so one of the ways to do that is to use this Middle Corridor, the transport corridors, which allows not only domestic demand, but also international demand. So if international countries, the countries nearby from the region can use this road, these facilities, then demand is greater. So that's easier to attract investments. And I agree with you. So from this book, we actually published a few years ago, we came to the same results, which are very similar to Roman and Adil's saying. So we are not contradicted. The results are very similar that improvements in this corridor, if we can reduce time or cost, it not only increases trade, but it also will lead to spillover effects such as employment will increase, taxes will increase, GDP, and like Adil said, social access, for example, health and so on, because local people can also use the roads, like, for example, railways, roads, for accessing, for example, education, healthcare, and they can also get better access to goods and services because they will be traded. And that will lead to the development of the region. I totally agree with Idil, like she said, we showed it in the book as well with simulation that the positive impact of investment in infrastructure, it's not only in the country where investment happens, but also for other neighboring countries. So that's totally the same results, that other countries will also benefit. But we showed some differences. There are benefits, some countries more, some countries less, but definitely the whole region will benefit, and benefits are not only domestic, but they also come to other regions. We also simulated this, how different improvements in corridor can lead to more spillover effects. So I will just, if you allow me, I just share you one page from the book. This shows for simulation 5S5, it shows what if we reduce customs border barrier by half? So if custom border barriers reduced by half, so we can see trade like doubles, and particularly the strong impact on Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, for example. So this is just an example of simulation, how countries can benefit. So some countries benefit more, some countries benefit less, but I totally agree that all countries from the region will benefit. For example, when after the war started, you probably remember in Central Asia it was hard to buy some products. For example, some medicine was very hard to buy. And 2022 for Central Asia become famous for high inflation rate. So among ADB member countries, Central West Asia, we call in ADB terms, it's Azerbaijan, Armenia, Caucasus region. So this region had the highest inflation rate comparing to other ADB member countries, let's say Southeast Asia, South Asia, Pacific. So it was the only region with 2-digit inflation rate, the only region. No other region had 2-digit inflation rate. And Kazakhstan reached 20% inflation rate. So partially the reason was that transportation became more expensive. It became slower, less predictable. That's what Roman and Idil mentioned. So all these things cost greater prices and then led to inflation. So I would like to conclude my answer by what I like Richard Pomfret said, that the region is not landlocked, but land connected. So let's join our forces. Like Idil said, we need to join forces to make this region from landlocked to land connected. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. That's a nice way of putting the intentions here in a nutshell. I also found it interesting how you kind of make clear that there is a very high payoff. There's economic leverage that improvements in policy and regulation have, and it's very stark to see what the impact on trade and transit is from these shifts in policies. So investing in policies can have a very high return, and it's a return that would then also change the parameters for investors. Now, we're coming to our last panelist, and that's my colleague here in the room, Elvira Mami, who's a senior economic risk analyst in ODI's Global Risk and Resilience Program, and she's a co-organizer of today's event. Elvira is an economist with expertise in international development, and her research interests lie in sovereign wealth funds, in economic connectivity, China and Central Asia. And so again, I think, Elvira, you're at the right place on this panel. And my question to you is, the Middle Corridor presents trade opportunities, clearly, for developing countries in the region. We've heard that. What are the implications for industrial growth in these countries? Over to you, Elvira.
Thank you so much for the discussion today. It has been really interesting. And I'll try to add what has not been said already about the benefits and risks of the Middle Corridor. Well, just 2 weeks ago, we've seen that the block train had journeyed from Xi'an in China to Baku in Azerbaijan in just 11 days, which underscores the efficiency and the potential of the corridor in facilitating trade in the region. So what does it mean for the region? Well, if we look at the region, the GDP of the Middle Corridor countries, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Georgia, and Kazakhstan together stands combined at all $1.7 trillion today. If we look at the Central Asia alone, the GDP combined stands at more than $450 billion, which has grown more than sevenfold in the last 20 years. Growing population of the region and the purchasing power of the region present opportunities for trading partners of the region. It is a big market. Secondly, the traffic along the Middle Corridor can be roughly, as previous presenters have discussed, can be divided into two categories, which is the transit trade between China and Europe, which has been quite elastic to shift from the Northern Corridor, and as others have mentioned, to the Middle Corridor after geopolitical shocks of the last few years. And also there is the trade and the traffic between the participating countries, which comprises mostly of raw materials, grains, and fertilizers. Export structures of participating countries, as we know, are concentrated in commodity exports. We have oil-rich Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan. Well, of course, improved connectivity will expand the opportunities in trade in more goods and services between the countries. But I'd like to mention one thing. However, it will also reduce the cost of importing goods to the region, which may have various effects and may have negative impact on the domestic producers if their goods are less competitive than the imports. So it is strategically important, I think, for the industrial policy of the countries to support domestic producers to increase their competitiveness and to upgrade their goods so that it's not just raw commodity exports, but to upgrade along the value chains. Supply development programs can support the domestic SMEs. Third, and of course others have mentioned, the low cost of trade and high connectivity will encourage the foreign direct investment into the region. The benefits would be maximized through encouraging linkages to the local SMEs and supporting local labor as well as technology transfers. And fourth is the question of financing. And I think Idil had discussed this already. How will the infrastructure be financed? Do we expect government external debt to rise? Which will mean that the participating countries will bear the responsibility of repayments over the next many years. Will it be the burden of the taxpayer? Or is it the public-private partnerships? And do we expect private investors to participate? And as Idil has mentioned, we have already seen some examples of multilateral banks lending to private companies in the region. For example, the EBRD has lent to a rolling stock operator in Kazakhstan recently, which will help to expand the capacity of the region. And fifth, we can see already the positive impact on countries like Turkey, which has become a crucial logistics hub in the region, benefiting from a trend in nearshoring, which is offshoring to the nearby countries. And we believe there'll be positive spillovers from this on the region itself. And will the nearshoring trend continue in the region? We don't know that, but it is a possibility. So to conclude, it is important for participating countries to seize these opportunities, to use the export potential productively, to support the domestic economy, domestic producers to upgrade and to be competitive enough to link to the global value chains.
Thank you very much, Elvira. I think one can hear me, right? Yeah. So that was great, and I take it, Elvira, you're basically optimistic about the Middle Corridor, and there's some evidence to back that up. There's some challenges, but the solutions are relatively clear. And so in principle, this is a package. What you're saying is that, you know, if the decision makers get together and they realize this and just move forward with it, we can realize the potential of this region. So this is, I think, something that we ought to look at a little bit more. And I'm going to ask the panel before we turn it over to the other participants here. By the way, let me remind you that you can submit questions for the panel or for individual panelists through the Q&A function. So, but let me first use my prerogative as chair to dig a little bit deeper into the various views that we've heard. And I would like to turn perhaps first to Roman. Roman, so you hear this somewhat optimistic view, which I believe you share from your perspective. The question is, how do you make this a reality? And it hasn't happened. And I remember from my own work going back, many years in this region, that the idea of the potential of a middle corridor of sorts, or whatever it was called in the earlier days, was always there. It was always this question, we need to invest into this corridor, but it didn't really happen. The harmonization within the region didn't really happen. So what is it that is going to, what would you focus on? What's sort of the thing that you would push in particular? What's the message from this panel to get this potential realized?
Thank you very much. Well, good question. I think one important thing which everybody stress, and we also would like to stress, that we need cooperation between countries. So it's not one country solution which can resolve the issues of the middle corridor. But that means I believe we are now a little bit more optimistic than we were in the past on that front, because, well, I think many governments in the regions, they appreciate the risks they are facing now with changing geopolitical situation, and they really perceive it's not a luxury kind of thing, but rather more and more as a necessity, and really resilience mechanism for them. So I think that's a major source of optimism these days. Secondly, as was mentioned, I think Elvira also mentioned that, Dina, that countries have more resources now, and they are much better prepared today to face and to deal with this kind of serious challenges. They are kind of more sober view with larger resources, with much higher role of the private sector in all these economies. That's again another source of kind of moderate but optimism in development of this corridor. Well, maybe I'll stop for now. Thanks.
You're
The optimistic case. Can you hear me now? Oh, I'm sorry, you couldn't hear me first. So I was just saying, thanks. It was very helpful to bolster the optimistic case. Can I ask Richard? I know that you prefer to predict the past and the future, but if we just pin you down right now, and you look at these various elements that we've heard about on this panel, the economics, the politics, the questions of regional harmonization, the uncertainty that you yourself brought into play with the alternatives. What is it that's going to happen? So 10 years from now, do you see this corridor happening, and why will it have happened in your view?
Okay, thanks. Just to go back to talk about the past, I would say one thing you said, the middle corridor hasn't happened. Clearly it didn't happen with Traseka back in the 90s. But I disagree with Dina that her book in 2021 didn't have much interest. I thought it had a lot of interest because the middle corridor was already operating then, maybe only 5% of the total trade, right? But what I think it showed was that alternatives are good. If you were trading between China and Turkey or Southern Europe, it was good to have that option and not have to go north through Russia and Belarus. So I think alternatives are good. I think what we will see looking forward is that there will be alternatives. The middle corridor will flourish. How much it flourishes depends on the competition. How you asked me to predict the end of the Russia-Ukraine war. I'm not sure where that's heading. How much is going on the northern corridor? I think we also need to think about how much the other obvious route geographically is to go south of the Caspian through Iran. How much that can become feasible doesn't look so good from the perspective of 2024. But if you're talking, 10 years in the future, that to me is an obvious link between China and the Middle East and Southern Europe. So I think what we'll see are the spread of alternatives, and the middle corridor will certainly be one of those. but I think there needs to be some flexibility. I think one of the problems you have with the modal change, though, is the sea transport across the Caspian, and particularly across the Black Sea, is obviously slower than rail, and it's also more uncertain. You have storms in the Caspian. You know, trains, you can predict the arrival date, which is important for global value chains. You're getting components coming in. You want them to arrive on Tuesday at 4 o'clock. And that's been a big advantage of the land bridge. So, yeah, I think electric rail is clearly environmentally and for lots of reasons, that's the way of the future. Which exact routes will be, I'm not sure. The middle corridor will be one of them, and I'm expecting it to flourish. It depends a lot on all of the states along the route, as we've seen in the Northern Corridor. If Russia becomes a bit uncertain, that disrupts things. What happens in Turkmenistan, to me, is a big question. Yeah, is it going to become more part of Central Asia, more cooperative? In which case, Turkmenbashi is probably a more useful port than Aktau that we're all talking about now, or will Turkmenistan remain the kind of semi-leper state that it was under Niyazov and the first Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. No, good point. So yeah, part of the regional integration challenge that we have is to integrate Turkmenistan, and if we do, then maybe the economics of the corridor are going to change, as you say. So very interesting. Let me make a little advertisement here for Dina, who has put a bunch of really interesting studies on the chat. So if you look into the chat, you will see a message there from Dina. And my last panel here is my last question as chair to the panel would be to Idil. And Idil, could you just comment on the costs of capital? In the end, that is going to play a big role. The cost of capital is high. We've heard this from you. We've heard this from others on this. But how are the EBRD, how are the other multilateral development banks going to be able to lower that cost of capital to deal with the uncertainty which is priced into this capital? And that would probably be quite a powerful push to the middle corridor if you could achieve that. Can you just comment on that?
Thank you, Hans. So basically, that's a very, very good question, which everybody is trying to figure out, I believe. The IFIs would be willing to provide capital as long as the projects are found to be feasible. And I believe most of the audience would understand what this means. So one thing is project feasibility here, but the second point is also demand. The IFIs, financing institutions, do not provide loans or guarantees or credits on their own. That demand has to come from the governments. And of course, we know that the needs are huge, needs are endless, because if you just assess the development agendas, development plans of all the countries, you can see there are like long lists of projects that are named there. But of course, it's not possible to finance everything. So maybe the first thing to focus here is project prioritization. What is needed and what will bring higher economic rate of return compared to its alternatives. So it's very important, and that cannot be all the time done by the IFIs on behalf of the countries. So the countries need to develop their own skills to identify and prioritize projects. So having said that, we've been, of course, like everybody else, we've been in discussions with the governments and of course with the other IFIs. And I do believe by the end of this month, the public will have a better understanding of where the IFIs are standing in terms of financing these kind of investments, because there is the Global Gateway Investors Forum in Brussels next week, and I believe a lot of people are aware of it already. So potentially there may be some announcements on the expected amount of IFI financing for these kind of investments, especially in Central Asia. So that may definitely help closing the gap that has been already identified. In terms of like different financing models, of course, it's subject to the project nature. So it's impossible to give an answer, a blanket answer that would apply to all the projects in the region, because some of these projects have higher costs due to obvious reasons. And it's almost impossible to lower the costs for certain projects. So those things need to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. So unfortunately, I'm not able to say anything in terms of pricing or like financing models, because these are project specific. Maybe Roman may have an idea from the ADB side here, but what I know is like next week's Global Gateway Investors Forum is a space to watch in terms of understanding how much the whole financing world, or like development financing world, would be able to chip in should certain measures are in place. So, but of course,
Okay.
we know that the needs are endless. The needs are huge, and it would benefit if we could see more private sector participation, and that requires a lot of market reforms, unfortunately. That could be supported by the IFIs, because we all are strong in market making mechanisms and providing support to governments. And that would ultimately, not in the shortest run, but in the medium term to long term, that would help closing the gap far faster.
Thank you, Idil. So that's actually very interesting. So the MDBs are essentially giving themselves a framework for planning around the middle corridor. I take this from you. We're going to see this in the context of the global gateway.
I wouldn't say it's a framework agreement between all the IFIs, but I think it's more of like goodwill representation around the forum to understand like who can do what, and to identify different strengths of different IFIs to support the developments in the upcoming years.
Right. We also have CAREC, we have the Global Gateway, we have the Belt and Road Initiative, and then we have the countries themselves. And we have an interesting question from Antoinette Sala on the chat, on the Q&A here, asking what are the financial commitments of the participating countries to the middle corridor? And some countries have deep pockets. Kazakhstan has deep pockets. Azerbaijan has deep pockets. What is the status? And can these countries can co-financing arrangements between the countries themselves, the MDBs, you know, the EU Global Gateway, the Chinese BRI, can those come together to enable funding, the capital cost? I don't know who I should ask first, but perhaps Dina, you could take a shot at this one.
Sorry, I think this question is very hard to answer. I haven't checked, but what I can say that government funding expenditure is really limited, and so it's important to think how to attract private investments and other funds, so not only rely on government expenditure. Because that's what I said, that when attracting investments in infrastructure in Central Asia is very hard, and because of this reliance on government expenditure, it's important to attract more other funds like private financing in order to meet them, because demand for infrastructure is huge. I remember several years ago, ADB did study what are investments needs in different regions, and the needs are huge, and infrastructure investments cannot be met only by public expenditure. But maybe someone else can answer better than me.
Yeah, maybe Dolores, do you want to have a shot at this? The question of financial commitments of the participating countries?
Financing, yeah. Actually, I want to add that in previous year we prepared some analysis for Eurasian Development Bank, and according to our results, it was logistic and transport logistical infrastructure sector. It was the most effectiveness and potential for good investments in our region, in the region of Central Asia. And that's why I think that Middle Corridor has this potential that it should be developed by investment from foreign countries, and also by potential participation whose goods will be transported by this way. And why I agree with Dina that it should be investment and maybe private sector. not only states. Thank you.
Not only state, no, absolutely. So let me take another question here, and Timur Useyev is asking about the bottlenecks. So capacity bottlenecks in the ports, administrative bottlenecks. What are sort of the key bottlenecks that need to be tackled? And if one were to build a bit of a timeline of action here, what is it? What's the advice that we would be giving the countries of the region? Where to focus on? Where's the highest payoff? Is that something perhaps that Racha, you could take on?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes. Yes, we could look into, I guess, on the perspective, if we're talking about the economic development of the region, export, or like if we are looking into development of economic the region, not just transporting from China to Europe. And then there is an issue with, for example, grain, and there is a limited capacity of grain transportation and at the ports of Georgia. And this has to be looked into, I guess, one of the, one of the points where we need to look at. But overall, there is, I have prepared, I guess, 6 bottlenecks from the infrastructure. So 2, I think, already mentioned. I will start again. It's a vessel unreliability, which I have mentioned, that just waiting for enough cargoes for vessels to operate at the Caspian Sea. Another is a railway capacity on the Caucasus section of the road. So at this point, to the best of my knowledge, it's only to the 15 million tons. Basically what railway capacity of Caucasus, which is Azerbaijan and Georgia railways. And there is also imbalanced traffic flow. So empty backhauls, high transport costs for container shipments. There's a larger volumes from the west-east direction, but lesser in the reverse direction, estimated to be 20% lesser, I guess. And the transloading results in a lower efficiency for the middle corridor, or TITR as we call it. Shipping lines who own the sea containers are reluctant to send the containerized cargoes to Central Asia due to the long time return. As such, most containers are unstaffed at Poti or Batumi, and then the goods are transloaded onto trains or trucks. So basically this increases obviously time and costs of the using TITR. And another is limited container yard capacity, which results in the need of moving containers to off-docks container yards outside the seaports. And because this physical capacity, basically space at the ports like Poti, does not have enough space for stacking the containers. And another one is the shortage of quality warehouse facilities where to save, basically. As per Georgian side, there is only one A-class warehouse near the airport, and then none near the ports, the seaports. So which also sort of makes difficulties for transporting products of the cold chain facilities, basically, that has to be frozen and so on. So this I could basically add on to the question. These are, I guess, one of the primary things to look at.
Thank you very much, Racha. I think it's really interesting how much we actually know about what could make the middle corridor economically viable, what the actions are that need to be taken. So you see there's sort of an action plan that can be effectively costed, and where we can describe the returns, like in Dina Ashgalieva's presentation earlier, where you can associate returns to political action. And an action plan for the region, I think, would kind of emerges from this discussion. Be kind of interesting to see how this can get advanced. Now, there's this interesting question by Isa Tussar in our Q&A about the role of governance in the region, in enabling, and sort of effective governance in enabling the viability of the middle corridor. And I think it's closely linked to this question. If we know what needs to happen, we can price it. What's the role of governance in making it possible? Can I just throw this to the panel as a whole? Who would like to come in on that? Roman, please.
Thank you. Governance has many facets, and let me mention one which is closer to my area of expertise, the macroeconomics. And this also links to our previous discussion about financing modalities. So these days, more and more, and especially in Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan and some other, in Georgia, international organizations turn to financing in local currency. And this has many advantages for the borrowers, both government and private sector, because that excludes foreign exchange rate risks. However, it depends critically on the monetary policy situation and on the inflation rate. So if usually key policy rates in the governments are not, should be higher, little bit higher than the inflation rate. So if you have high key policy rates, then of course all other rates in the economy, including our rates, which we lend on, use for lending to the governments and private sector, are high as well. So the way to reduce financing costs is to disinflate. And then if it's been, we went through a period of very high interest rates, inflation rates. Now it's lower, and governments started, central banks started to lower the key policy rates as well. So this single measure, that's governance, of course, will drive cost of borrowing down and will contribute dramatically to the investments, required investments for the middle corridor development. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Idil, do you want to comment on that as well?
I think that's a very right question, and it has been discussed a lot among the international community and the users for a long time, because a governance structure would enable the users to face a single authority in front of them instead of multiple agents, multiple stakeholders. So that's very important. And as we know, a very welcome step recently has been the establishment of this joint logistics company by the Kazakhs, Azeris, and Georgians. That's a very right step in the right direction. But of course, that needs to be topped a little bit with enhanced governance structures in order to also align norms and standards and harmonize the regulations, etc. Because once you cross the border, then the regulations change, and then another border crossing, another set of norms and rules. So that makes the life still difficult for the users. So improving the current goodwill that has been demonstrated by the establishment of this joint logistics company, by improved governance structures that would be supported by all the corridor countries, would definitely support the operations and potentially encourage more users to prefer middle corridor. However, as far as I'm aware, who's been working in the area for a while, I don't know if such a governance structure has been in place, or like the discussions somewhat started between the countries, but we haven't seen any solid action yet. But everybody is waiting for it to materialize as well. It is almost as important as like investments themselves, because actually if you have a solid operating structure, you can still make use of the existing network in a more efficient manner. So that would still make a difference, even if you don't invest huge amounts of money on the network as we speak.
Thank you, Idil. I think it makes a lot of sense. It seems sort of the obvious thing to do. Question is, why isn't it coming together? Why don't we see it? Richard, do you have any views on that?
I think it is coming together, but it happens slowly. I think it's the main view. I think we should also emphasize some of the positive things about governance. And one of the problems in Central Asia has been corruption. And yeah, that was a real problem when a lot of things were traveling by truck and the police would stop people and take bribes. You know, these going by rail with containers, as long as you agree on the seals that go through the customs, I think that really is a way to reduce the problem of corruption. I think that it's also clearly an environmental improvement to have electric trains rather than the old trucks we used to see in Central Asia. So I think there are some positive things on a very large level. I'd also emphasize when somebody earlier talked about what we really want is to increase living standards, and that depends on domestic policies. That's really, really clear. But I think we should be aware of worrying about the imports becoming easier to get into the country. That's one of the benefits. When you talk to entrepreneurs who are trying to develop export industries, they want world-class inputs. They want the inputs. So imported inputs are actually a good thing. Obviously, it might put some domestic producers competing with us out of business, but I think we should be aware of just thinking that's a big problem in itself of more imports coming in. It's in fact quite important for a lot of industries.
Yeah, no, that's correct. That's sort of the political economy of trade openness everywhere. We earlier touched on the question of the ecological impact. I think Rachel was the one who brought it up. Is that is something that we could just comment as a panel once more? To what extent does ecology play into, as part of this playbook, and is being taken into account in these calculations? So when I look at what you your calculations, Idil, or yours, Roman, or those of others like the World Bank's study there, to what extent does it take into account the ecological impact, the potential downside there, but perhaps the upside? So what Richard said, electrification could be actually helpful here. Does ecology play into this, into these scenarios? I don't know who would like to take that on. Dina?
Many thanks. This is a very important question you brought. Actually, we also need to think of the environment, the people, the pollution as well. So recent news that Central Asia is planning, for example, green hydrogen production. And it might be true that Kazakhstan will become world's largest green hydrogen producer. It's possible. So if that happens, then it will change. I think the transport can change a lot, because hydrogen gives great advantage for large trucks for transportation. They are clean, and also it's what's Elvira mentioned, to have more added value, because this will be local product. And so it's not just one country plant, it's two countries for now, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. Maybe more countries will join. For example, Pakistan has a good possibility. And then, transport corridor could not only become more efficient, but also could become greener. There are other ways to make, of course, corridor greener by just having this custom border, right, crossing, which Idil mentioned, to make it more efficient, make it faster. That's also good for environment, actually, because if cars stay long in a waiting line, that causes pollution. Like if you have a big traffic, it's cause pollution. If you have more efficient ports, including Caspian Seaport, railways, cars, if they work more efficiently, so they also cause less pollution. So there is lots of studies about, for example, seaports, but I think same applies. So if we can make, so it's not only using green energy, but also about efficiency of transport. If transport can move faster, then it's also, we can say, environmental impact is here. And also for making this easy transportation, we should remember that this transport road allows for transportation, for example, wind turbines, solar panels, and what Richard Pomfret mentioned, easy access for goods, to imported goods. And those would be goods necessary for environment, like, for example, solar panels, wind turbines, maybe lithium-ion batteries, and so on. So those, if transportation cost reduces, if they are accessible faster, that also will make the corridor, help to make corridor and countries greener, in my view. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Dina. That, of course, also raises the question whether the energy transition, the transformation of the economies there itself might drive future trade patterns and logistic patterns that differ from what what the planners thought a couple of decades ago, and to what extent that is going to change to shape thinking about the middle corridor in the future. So all very interesting stuff. I wanted to ask panelists for like one last intervention. You each have 30 seconds to tell us all what you think the focus ought to be for the Central Asia, for the financiers, the MDBs, other players. What should be the focus in the coming 2-3 years in order to make the middle corridor happen, or better, I take it, it is happening, but to accelerate the middle corridor. So from all that you see that is possible or not possible, that has high payoffs or less high payoffs, what is it what's your message to the world? Can I start with you, Idil?
Thank you, Hans. Given we are talking about short run, I think the key here is alignment of operational practices by the corridor countries. They need to come together and find shortcuts to enhance operational efficiency along the route before the window of opportunity closes for the middle corridor, so that they can utilize benefiting from their existing network. If they manage to align their structures and operations in ways that would support the users, I think that could still provide a good gain for the countries in the short run that they can build upon later.
Great, thank you, Idil. What about you, Roman?
Oh, thank you very much. I fully agree. We need to start with cheaper and this kind of not heavy financial on financial side activities. Let me add to that other trade facilitation measures, like we still have so many issues with customs, with borders, with similar issues, so that should be addressed. And secondly, on logistic organization, let me mention that the competitive environment should be created not only in comparison to other alternative routes, but also inside the corridor. So that's a way to drive costs down, really, to have some competing providers of services along the route. Thank you.
Thank you, Roman. Dolores, what is your advice?
I fully agree with my previous participants, and I also want to add that we should also focus on integration of processes in the region, and it should be political stability and more effectiveness using of transport potential, because this transportation of goods from south or south or north or west or east, it should be also more stability and effectiveness, and also it should must be some common joints for every country, and I think it will work well, if I can say in this way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolores. Radha, what are your views, your advice to everybody?
Well, thank you. I guess I'll be a bit different, in addition to everything that has been already said, that these countries in Central Asia has to pay attention to internal production. For example, the issue of empty backholes to be eliminated. We have to have something to export and trade with other countries. I think that's the message I would like to make. So freight forwarders here will have something to actually forward, and it will have a more sort of a process, like a tiny process into the big transport road to function. So basically for the countries to look into the internal production for something to have to sell and trade along the middle corridor.
Right, excellent. And there's a chicken and egg thing, right? So if there's potential, then you might see investment stepping up in these areas.
Exactly.
Dina, what's your recipe?
Thank you very much. Yeah, as previous speakers mentioned, that it's important that countries, regions, organizations, that we all work together. So I would like to invite everyone. Then let's facilitate this coordinated work. For example, at ADB we have this CAREC program, and so I think it's important to help countries actually to give them this platform where they can join forces together and work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. And Richard, you have sort of the final word on the panel, your recipe, but could you also give us a sense of where research can make a contribution? Or do we know everything already and it's just about the action at this point?
Nobody knows everything. No, I agree very much with the comments that we've just heard. I mean, I agree with Radka that if the Central Asian countries do want to improve living standards and so on, which was the ultimate goal, that it really depends on domestic reforms to make it easier to do business, but also any new developments are going to have to be more export oriented. Domestic markets are too small, so trade facilitation matters, and that's where the corridors come in. Clear the soft infrastructure is really important, of regulatory cohesion and having regional coordination. I think Central Asia is lucky in that CAREC has been developed. That's a great forum, particularly the Customs Committee, I think, for discussing these things. So I see a lot of this is positive. Specifically on the middle corridor, I'd say not to become too concerned about which exact route is going to be dominant, because I think the middle corridor will survive. Alternatives are good and flexibility is good. And where you'll be in the future might depend on a lot of things that are outside the region. What happens in Russia, what happens in Iran, what happens in China. These are really big unknowns, I think.
Great. Those are the known unknowns, at least. Thank you, Richard. Now, of course, I shouldn't have said that you're the last panelist to speak, because there's Elvira on my side, and I wanted to ask Elvira where she sees the research needs as well in this area. What is it that think tanks can contribute in this space in the coming years?
Yes, of course. Here in ODI, we work a lot on how global shocks affect the economies in the world. And from here, we can see that, yes, there was a global shock, which has affected the efficiency of the middle corridor, and we see more transportation going from Europe to Asia, which kind of contributed to opportunities for some countries in the region. But more research should be done in the area of supply chains, how these are being recalibrated, what are the dependencies of some countries in some supply chains on some inputs on other regions, and how that affects production, and we've mentioned nearshoring, offshoring, and what will that mean for other regions, and what opportunities and risks that opens up for other countries.
Great. Well, thank you. I don't think it's really necessary to try to summarize, because we've all been summarizing in many different ways now. And it's important for me. What sticks is the fact that we should see the middle corridor not primarily as a transcontinental solution here, even though it has its place there, but as a regional solution as well, and that's an important focus to give it. The countries of the region, according to all the research that we've seen here, the countries of the region have an enormous interest in making the middle corridor work for themselves. It's not just in order to enable smooth trade between China and Europe, but for themselves and as an opportunity for internal integration. And so much of the onus is really on the countries of the region here. And also what strikes me is that nobody disagrees about what needs to happen. there's quite a clear agenda here. It's about bringing it together. So the governance question, very important, could be at the center of it. Can countries agree to develop a common governance mechanism, which then kind of produces its own agenda of change that would follow. The other dimension is the financing dimension. Always very helpful to have financing available. It sharpens minds, it makes things possible that previously didn't seem to be possible. So the multilateral development banks, the EU, China, with their respective programs, are very important players in this as partners of the Central Asians. But I think, again, none of this is going to happen if the Central Asian countries don't drive it themselves and see their very, very own interest in making this possible. I find the various dimensions of uncertainty, interesting is sort of a word. We see it, I think many of us have said that now, as the least vulnerable route. Every trade route has its vulnerabilities. One benefit of the Middle Corridor is that it adds resilience. So we heard this about the perspective, especially of China, but still, even being relatively more resilient, it's facing a bunch of questions of uncertainties, and technology is one of those. So the ecology question that Radha put on the table is important in its own right, but it's also important as a sort of technology scenario that is evolving and that we're seeing evolve, and that is going to change the parameters here. It's going to change comparative advantage and may end up shaping transport and logistics solutions for the region as well. It's an interesting one. Plus, of course, all the political uncertainties, the questions of Iran, the questions of the Northern Corridor, so that those all play in. So uncertainty, potential uncertainty, cooperation, cost of capital, those are big areas. At ODI, we very much intend to continue working on this, on the Middle Corridor, on connectivity solutions in Asia. We feel that that's one of the big questions for the economy of the future. So we're going to be involved in there. We know that our colleagues at ADBI are involved, and we want to do this together. We would very much appreciate collaboration with others on this call, the multilateral development banks, Richard, and other researchers who have looked at this, the institutes in the region. We know Kazakhstan has really developed a great intellectual capacity in these areas. So let's think a bit about how collaboration also on the intellectual side can help to provide support and a framework for this, what we all understand is a huge potential for these countries and for the world. So with that happy note, let me conclude, unless I have overlooked something. Elvira, let me conclude with this panel and thank everyone. This was fantastic. You've all been great and very responsive. So hopefully to future events of this sort, we certainly intend to stay in this space. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.